Welcome to the City of Mesa Planning and Zoning Board public hearing. The first thing we'll do is call the meeting to order and go right into our consent agenda. If anyone is here to speak on any case that's on a consent agenda, please fill out a blue card and bring it to one of our staff members so that we can pull the appropriate case off the consent agenda. I see a couple of blue cards, so we'll wait just a minute. There's just a few people right there. Just a few people right there. Oops. Just got one card right there. Jessica, all your family, that's your husband and your kids. Minus the one, except the baby. Yeah, that's your husband and your daughters. That's cute. Slow day. So see, it's a good thing you're reading, then they get to see you in full action. Screw it up. You won't.
Do you know what case it is? Can you just...
Providence Temple. How's it going?
Anytime.
Oh, you don't have any. Thank you. What do we have here? I'll go through these. Is it okay, that was good. Okay, thank you, everybody, for your patience. We just wanted to make sure that we had all the cards. So we'll go ahead and read the consent agenda into the record, and Board Member Sarkisian has agreed to read that for us.
All right.
No pressure.
No pressure. Nobody watching. All right, for the items of the consent agenda is item 2, approval of meeting minutes from the previous meetings from May 15th, 2018 and May 16, 2018 study session and regular hearing. Minutes from the May 23rd, 2018 study session and special hearing. 2B. Item 3A, ZON 18-00137, District 3, 1754 West Southern Avenue, located on the north side of Southern Avenue, east of Dobson Road. Site plan review. This will allow for the development of a restaurant with drive-through in front of the existing commercial building. This is being withdrawn by the applicant. Item 3B, ZON 18-00212, District 5, the 4700 to 4900 block of East Indigo Street, the 1600 to 1800 block of North 48th Street, and the 4800 block of East Ingram Street, located west of Higley Road and south of McKellips Road for site plan review. This request will allow for the development of a manufacturing facility. Staff recommendation is approval with conditions. Case ZON 18-00216, District 6, the 10,000 through 11,000 blocks of East Southern Avenue, located east of Crisman Road on the south side of Southern Avenue, site plan modification. This request will allow for the development of multi-tenant commercial use with drive-through. Staff recommendation is approval with conditions. Case ZON 18-00225, District 5, the 1700 block of North Rosemont, located south of McKellips Road and west of Higley Road, site plan review. This request will allow for the development of 2 industrial buildings. Staff recommendation is approval with conditions. Case ZON 18-00227, District 4, 730 East Southern Avenue, located east of Mesa Drive on the north side of Southern Avenue, site plan review. This request will allow for the expansion of an existing industrial building. Staff recommendation is approval with conditions.
Thanks.
Okay.
It's for 4C, so we're good.
Okay. Case ZON 18-00231, District 5, 1608 North Greenfield Road, located south of McKellips Road on the west side of Greenfield Road, site plan review. This request will allow for the expansion of an existing office building and kennel. Staff recommendation is approval with conditions. Case ZON 18-00233, District 6, the 1800 through 1900 blocks of South Crisman Road, located north of Baseline Road on the west side of Crisman Road, site plan modification. This request will allow for the development of a mini storage facility. Staff recommendation is approval with conditions. Case ZON 18-00121, District 6, the 3600 to 5200 blocks of South Ellsworth Road, the 9200 to 10800 blocks of East Elliott Road, and the 3600 to 6000 blocks of South Signal Butte Road alignment, located south of Elliott Road between Ellsworth Road and Signal Butte Road. This is a major amendment to the Eastmark Community Plan. This request will make changes to the impact development units of 1, 2, 3, and 4 related to the land use groups and the land use budget, refinement to the dwelling unit character descriptions, and corresponding modifications to various sections of the community plan. Staff recommendation is continuous to the July 18th, 2018 meeting. Case ZON 18-00149, District 6, the 9800 through 9900 blocks of East Hampton Avenue and the 1400 block of South Crisman Road, located at the northwest corner of US 60 and Crisman Road, rezoning from PEP-PAD-CUP to PEP-PAD. This request will allow for an office and commercial development. Staff recommendation is approval with conditions. With the revisions from the study session, staff conditions of approval. Case ZON 18-00171, District 6, the 8200 to 8400 blocks of East Baseline Road, located west of Hawes Road alignment on the north side of Baseline Road, rezoning from AG to RSL-2.5 PAD and site plan review. This request will allow for the development of a single residence subdivision. Recommendation is continuous to the July 18th, 2018 due to re-advertisement. Case ZON 18-00221, District 1, the 1100 block of North Miller Street and the 900 block of East Brown Road, located on the north side of Brown Road and the west of Stapley Drive, rezoning from OC to RS-9 Biz and the site plan review. This request will allow for the development of a single-family residence. Staff recommendation is approval with conditions. For preliminary plats, Heritage Crossing 2, District 6, the 8200 to 8400 blocks of East Baseline Road, located west of Hawes Road on the north side of Baseline Road for preliminary plat. Staff recommendation is continuous to July 18th, 2018 to re-advertise. Preliminary plat for Piper Plastics, District 5, the 4700 to 4900 block of East Indigo Street, the 1600 to 1800 block of North 48th Street, and the 4800 block of East Ingram Street, located west of Higley Road, south of McKellips Road for preliminary plat. Staff recommendation is approval with conditions. Eastmark DU5, parcels 5-1 and 5-2, the 3,800 to 4,000 blocks of South Everton Terrace and the 3,800 to 4,000 blocks of South Eastmark Parkway, located south of Elliott Road and west of Signal Butte for preliminary plat. Staff recommendation is approval with conditions. Eastmark Commercial, 9,200 to 9,700 blocks of East Ray Road and the 49 to 5,100 blocks of South Ellsworth Road, located on the northeast corner of Ellsworth and Ray Roads for preliminary plat. Staff recommendation is approval with conditions. Metro East Valley Commerce Center 2, the 1,700 to 1,800 blocks of South Horn and the 600 to 700 blocks of East Auto Center Drive and the 1,700 to 1,800 blocks of South Hopeson, located north of Baseline Road and east of Mesa Drive for preliminary plat. Staff recommendation is approval with conditions. Bella Encanta, the 9,500 to 9,800 block of East Hampton Avenue, located north of the US 60 and the west side of Crisman Road, preliminary plat. Staff recommendation is being tabled to re-advertise.
Thank you very much.
There
That
was
was
more.
the long, oh, sorry.
There's more.
I was going to congratulate you
We're
on
not
this.
done.
Okay.
All right, two more. ZON 18-00181, District 6, the 9,500 to 9,800 block of East Hampton Avenue, located north of the US 60 at the west side of Crisman Road, minor general plan amendment to change the character type from employment to neighborhood. This request will allow for a small lot, single residence subdivision and multi-residence development. Staff recommendation is being tabled to re-advertise. ZON 18-067, District 6, the 9,500 to 9,800 block of East Hampton Avenue, This feels like it's the same one. Located north of the US 60 at the west side of Crisman Road. This is the rezoning from NC Biz to PEP-PAD-CUP to RSL-2.5-PAD and RM-3-PAD and site plan review. This request will allow for a small lot, single residence subdivision for multi-residence development. And again, this one is being re-advertised, able to be re-advertised. That is it.
Thank you. Thank you for reading that very long agenda on such short notice. I appreciate that. Okay, so that does it for the consent agenda. We'll go ahead and move to the, I am so sorry, I'm not having a good day today. Do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I would make a motion that we approve the consent agenda for June 20th, 2018, as read in for the record.
Okay, do we have a second? Okay, all in favor, please vote. It's not showing up on our screen here, so all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, the ayes carry, then we are through with the consent agenda now. Thank you. Now we'll move on to the regular agenda. Let me get my glasses here. Okay, item 4E, case ZON 18-00375 in District 4. This is the 0 block of South Mesa Drive, the 400 block of East Main Street, the 0 block of South Udall, and the 0 block of South LeSueur. This is a request to rezone approximately 4 acres from T5MS and T4NF to T5MSF, and to rezone 2 acres from T4NF and T4NHD to TFMSF HD. This request will allow for a mixed-use development. And we have the companion plat. I guess we'll go ahead and do that too. That's item 5C, so that would be the companion preliminary plat to this zoning case. And Tom Ellsworth is our planner.
Madam Chair, did you read in the preliminary plat also? Thank
Yeah,
you.
we just did that at the very end.
Madam Chair, members of the board, this is a request to rezone a site within our form-based code. The site's located at Mesa Drive over to LeSueur. It's just west of the Temple site, and it goes from Main Street to the half block south towards First. It's a half block between Main Street and First Street. What we're talking about here is kind of go through the form-based code and how the approvals work. What your request before you today that you're considering is a modification to the transects within that form-based code. The applicants opted into the form-based code. The transects that exist on the site are a combination of T5 Main Street, T4 neighborhood, and let me go to the transect plan. I believe there's, or I could just read. I want to make sure I get this right. Oh, it's on the screen. I'm trying to remember if there's some T4 neighborhood flex in there. There is also. A portion of this site also sits within a historic district, to the Temple Historic District. So there's also a rezoning within there to take care of that, or not take care of it, but acknowledge that it's within that historic district. The applicant is doing this to facilitate the redevelopment of the site. What they have provided for you is a conceptual plan of what they propose to present during their zoning clearance. After somebody's opted into the form-based code, they then select building types and building forms, and it's very prescriptive in the style of the form of the buildings, and that in form-based code, you pay attention to the form of the architecture and the structure ahead of the land uses that go in there. The primary change between a T5 Main Street and a T5 Main Street Flex, the flexibility allows you the flexibility at the first floor to involve commercial or non-residential and residential uses. So the applicant has requested T5 Main Street Flex to facilitate the building forms and types that they're proposing within this as they come forward to the zoning clearance. I want to talk about the zoning clearance just a little bit. There is no site plan associated with this. The site plan happens through our zoning clearance process. It's administrative review. As we look at the site plan as it comes through and compare it to the forms and the transects that are found in our form-based code chapters. So we'll be looking at their maximum setbacks at the heights, at the entry locations. It's very prescriptive on how they can design the site. Part of that zoning clearance also does include the architectural review. So we do look at it for quality, we do look at it for context of the site. That architectural review, again, is through the staff level. I know there was some discussion at the study session about design review involvement. The design review board doesn't make their recommendations on form-based code. So that the request before you is to make those modifications. They have provided in their narrative and in their exhibits that they've shown, those are concepts. They're still working on the refinement of those. I know they're prepared to make a presentation on what their overall development plans are for the site. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer those. Oh, let me add, as you go through the analysis, the general plan for this site, it's a combination of neighborhood and downtown. It's within a transit station area. It envisions a pedestrian-oriented, transit-oriented, higher density style of development, precisely what they're proposing and what this transect would allow. It also fulfills recommendations that you find within the Central Main Plan as it relates to the downtown area and the Temple Pioneer neighborhood itself. So the request that they're presenting before you is in conformance with the general plan, with the sub-area plan, and with the goals of the form-based code itself within the zoning ordinance. So staff is recommending approval with some standard conditions.
Thank you very much. Board Member Allen?
And I just have a question for you. This has gone before the Historic Preservation Board, I presume, and what was their feedback?
Correct. I forgot to add that. It's in the staff report. They did go in front of the Historic Preservation Board at their June meeting. As part of this, it's in a historic, it's part of the historic district itself. And so there are about 8 homes that are affected by this. As part of that, there's been a demo permit requested and denied. As part of that, it requires them to go have discussions with the HP board regarding preservation that may occur. So those discussions happened. As part of that discussion, they discussed how the transects kind of decrease the density as you get towards that neighborhood scale, as you get closer to First Street. And so one of the things that I did fail to mention is when you look at the transect plan, there's that area about 85 feet north of their south line of this project. They've agreed with the HP board to a limitation on the number, to a 3-story height to facilitate and to ensure that there's that step down in density as you approach those neighborhood densities and intensity of use. I'll probably defer to John if there's any other specific discussion that happened at.
Yeah,
I'll get you when
open
you
it
get to
up
the
to the
card.
public and
So
you'll,
there were some discussion about the historic.
yeah, we'll have you come up and tell us about the meeting. Thank you.
So my understanding is that there was a recommendation to the approval of what they were seeing. There'll be some clarification of that. But, so the HP board did see this to the extent that they could. The HP board recommendation on the form-based code is forwarded in the minutes itself. But there is no modification to the historic district. So it's still there. So as this comes through zoning clearance, it will also need to get a certificate of appropriateness as it relates to that historic district itself. That's also a review that's done through the historic preservation officer.
I have a follow-up. And my other question, how many properties, or of the properties that they've applied for demolition, were they contributing to the historic district?
Yes, they're all contributing except for one,
Okay,
but all the ones in this area were contributing.
okay, thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions for staff? No, go ahead. Okay, would the applicant like to make a presentation, please?
City Creek Reserve, and we appreciate the opportunity to make a presentation today. I'd like to invite up with me David Davis with Dale Garden Architecture.
Good afternoon. I'm David Davis, 20885 North 90th Place, Suite 100, Scottsdale, Arizona. I'm the design consultant working with City Creek. Happy to be here today. We're going to give you a brief presentation on the design character and how we got to this point. I think there's been a lot of talk through individual public meetings, Historic Preservation Board, staff, and even downstairs about what is the request, but we want to give you a little background on why the request is in front of you and what our thinking has been up to this point. Carl and I have been working with a much larger team. This is a fairly expansive and complex project. There's a lot of properties involved. Those of you who have been tracking this over the years have known that there's a land assembly process that's been taking place so that the overall goal is to do a twofold improvement of this district. One is to the actual temple itself, which you can see evidence of that now, and the neighborhood surrounding the temple. One without the other doesn't really go together. And so our client, this development team, and the landowners have been working consciously together to think about the two together at one time. And the overall vision for this neighborhood community is to create a mixed-use environment that's compatible with the transit-oriented development standard that I think the city would like to see. But it's also important that the neighborhood also respect and pay close attention to the character of the Temple District, and we'll show you today a little bit what that means. Let me see if I can work this. I'll do the arrow. The context of the area, forgive me, I'm going to try to do this so that the cursor, I don't know if you can follow my cursor around it. You know the area fairly well. We're going to be talking about the north end of the blocks along Main Street between Mesa Drive and Le Sueur. It's about 4.6 acres. And currently it's either vacant land, vacant commercial, or single-family residential, which is all rental residential at this point. There are 7 homes that occur within the historic preservation boundary. They are all rentals. It's important to know, and we'll cover this with a graphic in a moment, but it's important to know that not the entire site is in historic preservation district. Only a portion, and actually a smaller portion of this requested redevelopment site is actually in historic preservation district. We also know that there are really a number of factors that we have to pay attention to as well. Downtown for sure. Technically, if you look at the downtown boundary, downtown in the planning sense really ends at Mesa Drive. We don't really see it that way. We see this as a more holistic planning and development continuum of the downtown redevelopment, certainly connected by light rail, evidenced by the station across the street. But we also have the temple and the temple grounds adjacent to us. So we actually have temple on one side, town on the other. And then we have the neighborhood, this historic neighborhood, and the neighborhood that is going through transformations all around us. All 3 of those are important factors as we look at the development of this. And yes, we're going to talk about the massing as we step down to the neighborhood, but we also want to talk about architectural character a little bit towards the end of this presentation. From a horizontal standpoint, the general plan, yes, does designate this as a stationary within a transit corridor. The light rail directly across the street on Mesa and Main Street does have an impact to our thinking about the development program for this. There's somewhat different forces involved here. When we look at the Temple Historic District, which is the red line on the map in front of you, we'll look and we'll notice that the majority of the redevelopment area that we are requesting the rezone on today falls outside of that. Doesn't necessarily make it less important. It just means that it's not impacted by the HT transect zoning. Yes, there are some areas that are HT transects in the zone, and we need to be cognizant of those. And we should think of this as a entire place, not something that has one character in the HD and one character outside the HD. We're thinking of it holistically. The proximity to the light rail really is kind of the crux of the issue in front of us from a planning and design standpoint. When we look at the historic districts and landmarks in the city of Mesa will see that the Temple Historic District is actually along Main Street, as close to Main Street as any of the other districts with respect to one other. But when you apply what would be conventional, and I'm going to say conventional quarter-mile walking radius from transit stations, we've been doing this a long time. I know you've been doing this a long time. In Arizona, I think we probably can manage that down to maybe 1/8 of a mile. People are willing to walk maybe in the heat and in downtown Mesa, downtown Phoenix, and other communities. Regardless, within a quarter-mile walking distance of the transit station, that's where we fall within. So when we have historic preservation, which on one hand is preservation, with the redevelopment activities that are intended to be spurred by light rail, those are the two opposing forces that really identifies the crux of the issue. Our response to that has been to design a place that we think is a fit within the community, authentic to Mesa, and also that will fit within the neighborhood as it exists now. As part of this process, we happily went through a citizen participation program that included a number of meetings with stakeholders and neighborhood groups individually and as groups. We had 2 public meetings at the end of May. We had a media briefing to identify the project out to print and video media and social media. We also had the presentation that was mentioned earlier to the Historic Preservation Board. And in addition to that, prior to all those public meetings, the notification went out to landowners 1,000 feet from the property, which is generally double the 500 feet, which is required by ordinance. The topic of where the historic district is relative to the redevelopment district, what you'll see on the proposed site plan is a pedestrian via. We'll get to that in a moment. That's what the green here means, but that's really the southern boundary of the redevelopment request. This is where the property is that the request for the rezone is. This is the properties in the Historic Preservation District, and these 4 properties here where the demolition permits were requested and denied that Planning Director Wesley mentioned. The current transect zoning is, as mentioned, T5 Main Street along Main Street, T4 neighborhood flex beyond that, and then T4 neighborhood closer as you get to First. What's important to remember also is that we're also part of a bigger downtown story, and the transects and the regulating plan for the entire downtown will show you that there's a number of instances where there's T5 Main Street flex or T5 Main Street right along Main Street backed up by T5 Main Street flex before we get to T4. In addition to that, we actually have T4 Main Street flex, T5 Main Street flex and T5 Main Street just north of us across the street, adjacent to Pioneer Park. There's going to be a couple slides here. This is the existing transect planning. T5 Main Street along Main Street here, T4 Neighborhood Flex along Mesa Drive, T4 Neighborhood Flex HD along Udall, and T4 Neighborhood Flex along LeSueur here. What we're requesting is that from the line that is identified by the pedestrian via to the north to Main Street, which will all be one contiguous parcel for redevelopment with the garage below it, a below-grade garage below it, be rezoned to T5 Main Street Flex. And within T5 Main Street Flex, it allows 55-foot high buildings. We're going to show you where we're at from a massing standpoint, which is going to be under 55 feet. And as we step down towards the neighborhood and towards the temple, we'll be quite a bit below 55 feet. And because of that, we were certainly willing to accept the Historic Preservation Board recommendation stipulation that a portion of the land be stipulated to no more than 3-story to ensure that that occurs even in our initial development and future development.
Hey, can you flip back to that previous slide and then back to this?
I'm going to go, Tim, Board Member Boyle, to me to be informal about that. So the side-by-side we'll stare at for a moment. That way you can compare the two of them. Below this line, there are no changes. As a matter of fact, where it says existing is where the zoning is currently in the regulating plan. It is not being requested to change at this point. North of this line to Main Street is where the request is being made. I can continue, or if you have a question, I'd be happy to clarify anything for you.
And the thing here is T4 there's a different height limit, right? That's the main,
3-story maximum height.
and then T5 is 4-story and higher.
2-story minimum and 55-foot high
55 feet high.
maximum.
Okay.
Depends on if it's flex or not, but we're asking for flex, so it's 2-story minimum, 55-foot high maximum. There are T5 that allow you to go 85-foot, but we're not requesting that. In addition to the rezoning request, we also have a preliminary plat request that is in front of you. Our site plan is part of our design proposal, so the remaining images are going to be related to the design proposal. From a horizontal layout, it's a mixture of uses. At Le Sueur and Main Street is going to be a church use building. So those of you who are aware that the visitor center is being removed off the temple grounds, that use is going to be moved over to the corner here, giving it more prominent corner right on Main Street. It's going to be combined with the Family History Center, which is currently at First Avenue and Le Sueur. So those two uses are going to be combined in this blue building right here on the corner, with 5 to 6 residential units for church use on the 3rd level facing Main Street. The building here is a commercial use on Main Street at the 1st level with 2 levels of residential above. This is a residential building here on Udall and along the Via and facing Le Sueur here. This is a pedestrian via that is a sidewalk, landscape sidewalk that connects the neighborhoods from Main Street downtown to the temple and connects to the other parts in the courtyards and the gardens within this new neighborhood. When we cross Udall, this is a residential building with commercial on the corner here. It also has amenities for all the residents who are going to live in this 4.6 acres. Outside pool, clubhouse, fitness, club room, things like that are going to be in this building. So if you're a resident over here, you'll be able to cross the street, use card access to be able to use the amenities over here. So we believe that the more a central communal social amenity for all the residents that live here. There is a 1-level parking structure below ground. That was a heavily debated topic early on in our planning process. Conventional wisdom says that this isn't high enough and this really isn't tall enough to do structured parking. But when we actually did layouts for surface parking, more than 50% of the land was taken up for surface parking. We didn't get much back out of that. We had to go taller on the buildings, which wasn't great for the temple and wasn't great for the neighborhood. So the property owners have accepted a somewhat unconventional condition, and that is to go below ground, park everything below ground, and pay the additional cost to do that. The benefit of that is to have no surface parking up on the block. And where the buildings are, we're actually going one step further by depressing the garage a couple of extra feet, so we have a lot more soil on the garage roof, so we can get better planting up here, so we can be somewhat commensurate with the rest of the neighborhood that has tall trees, lusher landscape. We'd like to be able to fit within that character as well.
Can I ask you a question right there?
Certainly.
So is Udall going to remain a public street, or are you closing that off or using it for access to in and out of this project?
It's a good question, Board Member Allen. The Udall section from the Via north is going to be abandoned, combined into the overall property. But we also feel strongly that that street is important and we want to maintain that street. The street's going to be rebuilt. It'll look and feel like a public street, even though it'll be on private property. And it will continue just as it is today. It'll have tree line. It'll have a detached sidewalk. It'll have parking on the side of the street. It'll have 1 lane each direction. The action to abandon and rebuild is a condition of the below ground parking. The alternatives to maintaining a private structure under a public street wasn't as clean and smart as abandoning and building the street at the end of the process.
To be clear, though, Board Member Allen, it is a public street. It doesn't look and feel as a public street. A non-restrictive easement will be granted back to the city, and it will continue to operate as a public street.
Is the parking garage gated, and is it just for residents, or is it used for everyone?
It actually has divisions of demarcation in the garage, so it won't be gated. There's going to be parking for the residents. There's going to be parking for the church use, the visitor center, and the family history center. And there's also a small number of parking for public use that we envision would be overflow parking for events at the temple or for downtown that'll be able to be used within the garage. A demarcation plan will be presented as we go through the zoning clearance that shows you where you can park if you're a resident, where you park if you're church use, and where the public parking is. Okay. The development program, I know this is hard to read because the text is small. The main point here is that we're about 240 to 260 residential units on this 4.6 acres. We're in the mid-50s on density per acre. And we have a total demand by zoning of about 320 parking spaces, although we're going to provide about 420 parking spaces overall because we're going to park the residential at 1.5 per unit, not 1 per unit. And we want to have that additional parking for public use in the garage itself. There's going to be a series of slides that we'll be able to show you before and after. This is one of the before photos. There's a lot of things I like about this photo. It's actually interesting to see it from this perspective, but when you're on the ground, you see a lot of vacant land, a lot of empty commercial buildings. But we do see the new transit stop there, and we do see a lush temple ground that's actually going to go through the remodel as it started now, and it'll be quite a bit more beautiful than it is right now. So we're going to be essentially between downtown and the temple. And as we step through the architecture and the massing, I'm going to use a diagram. I think that'll be a little bit more helpful to this after all this discussion. The numbers represent the number of stories in the buildings. So we have 4-story building that will be under 55 feet along Mesa Drive and Arterial and along Main Street directly across from the transit stop. We now step down to 3-story as we proceed east along the Via, and then we cross Udall. We are 3-story here, and then we step down to 2-story along the Via as we step to the neighborhood. We have a 4-story pop-up on the building here that overlooks the open space into the garden and the court on the west block, and we're 3-story along Main Street here, and we step down to 2-story along LeSueur, 2-story further down LeSueur, and 2-story here on row homes as we step down to the neighborhood, which is not too much higher, if not the same as what the 2-story homes in the neighborhoods are right now. And as a rendering of the proposed finished character looks in relation to the existing neighborhood with the temple and the improved temple grounds in the scene along the light rail. It's also important to note here that there's an existing bus stop, transit stop here. Through working with transportation and traffic, it became difficult to consider any of their options besides keeping that here. So we've actually altered the architecture around that structure. It'll remain in place, and the architecture will respond and open up and clear some room around that so there's more room for people to wait and circulate around that bus shelter. Looking from another view with the temple in the foreground, looking to the northwest, this is the existing view. This is a proposed view. And what's important about a view like this, it starts to show the context of downtown Mesa as we start to see the larger footprint building. We talk a lot about grain and size of building. We believe that this really wants to be a small and medium grain development, not a large grain. We don't want the buildings to be oversized and look too big, but we know that we have that condition already emerging and it's moving its way east. We're going to be larger building on the west block against Mesa Drive, but as we get closer to the temple, the neighborhood of buildings are going to become smaller, finer grain. One more before and after. This is a not complete architectural expression of the building, but it's getting close to a civic character we're looking for. And then we have a view looking down at the gardens and courts. This is the central amenity on the west block. This is Udall right here. And then the court that's shared between the church use and the residents here. And they're linked by openings between the buildings so you can pass through and be connected through the neighborhood. A couple of other views, I'll go through these quickly. We can go back and answer questions if you feel that necessary. These are also in your packet. We're evolving as we go through the process, but we've gone through a exhaustive process looking at a lot of different architectural styles and characters. We are interested in an authentic Mesa, authentic Arizona, authentic Sonoran character. Those are two general influences. The Spanish and the Western characters come to us over the last century. From that, we get traditional styles that really created our communities pre-war and post-war. And just recently, in the last 30, 40 years, we start to see a certain sense of modernism coming into the communities. And now we start to see traditional and modern. And that is kind of where we're at in our thinking, that we want to be traditional as a related character to the temple. We don't want to match the temple, but we also don't want to be overly contemporary. There's places in downtown Mesa for that. There's places in Main Street for that, but we feel like in this proximity to the temple, it's better to be more traditional with contemporary detail, with contemporary forms and clean lines, and create an expression that is fresh and modern with traditional forms that is more representative of the authentic neighborhood itself. I'm going to step through this. This is the building on Mesa and Main. The top elevation is the row home, two-story row home on the Via with a historic neighborhood to the south of this. And then the lower elevation is along the Swirr with Main Street on this side. So this is the church use building that steps down from 3-story to 2-story. And then the 2-story residential and the 2-story row home into the Via right here. The images provided are just a few that we've used, and we've used a lot with our client team in our exploration of architectural character. We're interested in this idea of civic architecture, which is clean lines, proud elements, some symmetry, not symmetrical, but some symmetry for our church use and our civic buildings. But we also know that there's a character in this traditional brick building that we are interested in, that we want to bring back down into downtown. We see it all over the Sonoran Desert in Arizona. Mesa has a record of that, and we like to bring that brick building character back into this neighborhood. And then there's also these other cleaner, fresher version of traditional modern buildings, what I like to call classic urban buildings, that are proposed on Mesa and Main and on the East Block at Udall. And when we talk about, one last point, when we talk about traditional with classic urban character, we are interested in contemporary and modern detailing, whether those are browse, light fixtures, signage, window details. That combination of modern with classic is the overall expression that we think that the architecture will express here in this redevelopment. So with that, this is our last image looking from Main and Mesa back towards the temple with the redevelopment proposal. With that, we'll end and answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions for the applicant?
So with 240 to 260 residential units coming in, do we know what the effect is going to be on the schools that are in this thing? I know you guys are sick of me asking this question, but.
Well, Board Member Boyle, we did receive an impact analysis from the schools. They've indicated that they can take on the additional demand. They estimated that there would be approximately 12 to 14 elementary school students. Hang on, no, I get that backwards. That's high school students. About 20 to 30 elementary school students, and then junior high students were in about the 15 to 16 range.
Really? For 260 residents, you get 20?
That, based on their ratios and their analysis of our current occupancy levels versus the census, that's what they come up with. I'll provide you with their detailed impact analysis, but that's what they come up with. That's commensurate with what we've seen with this type. What they do is they run a ratio against different density levels within the city and what they've traditionally seen come out of those levels. So I can share that analysis with you.
Yeah, I'd like to see that. Thank you.
Any other questions right now? Thank you.
Vice Chair, if I may, before you, you're probably going to go to public comment next, but kind of as they're sitting down before the public gets started, I just wanted to come back and refocus the board and the applicants and any audience that comes in. We appreciate the presentation that's been given that gives a lot of detail about where they think they're going with the building forms and types and styles. While that's interesting and helpful to kind of understand where this may go, it's not really the question before you today. The question really is changing from the T5 Main Street along Main Street itself to the T5 Main Street Flex, which brings things down just a little bit. And then on the southern portion, kind of stepping up from the T4 neighborhood Flex to the T5 Main Street Flex. So that's the real kind of question that's after that, is that zoning question. Is that appropriate change in the zoning, with the understanding also that they have limited themselves on that southern portion to a maximum of 3 stories in the T5 Main Street Flex.
Thank you. Okay. Well, thank you. We'll probably have some more questions for you. We're going to go ahead and open it up to
We'll leave that
the
up
public
until
comments. We'll give you a chance to, okay. All right, so we have 3 blue cards. The first one is Jen Duff, who'd like to speak on this item. If you could please come up and read your name into the record, please.
Hello, I'm back again. I couldn't stay away. On this side. So Jen Duff, 146 West 2nd Street in Mesa, and I do live in a historic district, which is one of the reasons that I'm speaking. And believe it or not, I'm not opposing the approval of this rezone, but what I want to bring to light is why I'm not opposing the rezone is that there is no protection over demolishing historic homes. We have no policy, we have no teeth as in our historic preservation policy. So in our historic preservation policy, we can't change our windows or our doors or make any structural changes in our homes. But there is nothing in our historic preservation policy that prevents a person or an entity from buying a home and demolishing it. So in this particular project, just to bring awareness, there are 7 contributing homes that will be demolished in this project. It's in the Temple Historic District, which has, let me get my numbers, I think it's like 93 homes. 62 are contributing, less 7 brings us down to 55 out of the 93, which is a 59% remaining that are contributing. And it takes 50% to retain historic status. So you see that it gets very close to losing that, and as there's possible more development, that could go away. Our historic homes have been the strength and stability of downtown when downtown has been ailing. It's always been a little bit of charm, and it carries our culture and our history. So basically, there's a couple of notes here that we have never lost a historic district in Arizona, and less than 1% nationally are lost due to development. I am pro-development, but I am pro-historic preservation. And in our city, historic preservation has no flex, no arm, no power, no teeth. It's just a handshake, and isn't it nice we live in a historic district? Development, it has plenty of strength. And the applicant is well within the rights as a property owner to do this. There is nothing that they're doing wrong. This is just something I want to bring awareness to, that going forward as a city, we can look at our policy and ordinance to protect our historic properties as we go into more development. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Jen, just real quick, if you don't mind. It sounds like you might have a new calling? Are you going to try to initiate some amendment to our zoning ordinance regarding historic preservation or the policy that we have today?
Absolutely. I didn't realize that in the Historic Preservation Board or in community input that there is just a matter of preference, but it's not a matter of protection. So yes, that is something I would like to work on and give more strength. And we can, there's a number of ways we can do that. And I won't take up your time on that, but it'll start with the Historic Preservation Office in our city. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, the next card is Janice. Is it Genevois or okay? Let me remembered a little bit from my French class.
Yeah, you did great. I'm Janice Genevois. I reside at 150 North Wilbur, and that is inside the Glenwood Wilbur Historic District. And I've been living there almost 25 years. My 118-year-old Victorian had a wrecking ball next to it, and we moved it and saved it and created a historic district. But for the last 10 years, the city of Mesa has been without a historic preservation officer who had the credentials, the education, and the expertise. It was resigned. The position was turned over to planning and zoning and redevelopment departments. And so very well-meaning individuals have been in charge of the preservation program, but they've lacked the foresight and the knowledge about how to protect so many entities that have recently gone missing. I wanted to say so I'm speaking as a citizen, also as the vice chair of the Historic Preservation Board. The board did send a recommendation to planning and zoning, and the board found that there is really no reason to rezone this area because it's already allowing for 3 stories. Back in 2012, there was a historic overlay rezone that took it to T4. I mean, our real concern is that there are no more than 3 stories along the southern part of the project, which isn't up there, but that's adjacent to single-family homes, because these are historic homes, and some of them are contributing properties. So in a historic district overlay, you can't go more than really 2 stories. And the Historic Preservation Board really wants to stay involved in what happens to the area north of First Avenue, because the removal of the 7 contributing properties will definitely affect the integrity of the Temple Historic District. Not to mention Udall Street currently has 100-year-old trees, WPA sidewalks that are significant to Mesa history. And, but we feel that, and in regard to the meetings and all of that, actually there was quite a lack of transparency. The homes were bought up in many different names. The corporation uses many different names, and individuals were buying the properties for years and then holding them for the church, which is terrifying for all of the other surrounding districts, because if an entity, a corporation, or a developer buys enough properties in the Glenwood Wilbur district or the 2nd district, or we have 7 districts now, then if they buy enough of them, they can just demolish them, and then the districts will no longer be relevant, and there will be absolutely no protection. Think about Phoenix. People flock to the Willow District to buy their there are so many economic benefits of historic districts and neighborhoods. And we have been trying for years to create beautiful, stable, historic districts. So I appreciate your thought on this issue and hope that you will understand the the response of the Historic Preservation Board. And I'd also just like to, I have one petition here, I have more that I can bring, but I'd like to have this petition added to the minutes. There have been pages of people against the historic Temple District being demolished. Thank you.
Thank you. If you could give that to our staff, thank you.
Hey, can we put in a stipulation that for this to go forward, there has to be a historic preservation officer re-added to the thing? That's got to go through a whole other process, right? Or is that a recommendation we can make from this board and then it goes on to the city council, or that has to work through a whole separate? Okay.
Can you come back up to the microphone if you were to say anything else?
It has taken the Historic Preservation Board 5 years to get a $100,000 line item budget on there. We finally got it. It took us 5 years. 2 years ago, they gave us a 20-hour-a-week contractor for $50,000. We were able to talk Mr. Brady and to Mr. Giles to get that funding. So
Vice
we've
Chair,
had,
this really has nothing to do with the zoning request that's before you. It's way outside your purview.
it's up for a vote in September.
Thank you. Okay.
The debate is it going to be a city-funded position or a contractor?
See what you did, Mr. Boyle? You caught. All right, thank you. All right, we have one more blue card from Patrick Tucker, who wishes to speak. If you could please come up and state your name and address for the record, please.
Sure, my name's Patrick Tucker. I'm at 136 North Hibbert. Vice Chairman, members of the board, Mr. Wesley. I just want you folks to remember that you are allowed to say no. I mean, you're the safeguards. You're the outlet that takes all the great ideas that come rolling down Main Street and just bulldoze over everybody else. So I support, private landowners being able to do what they want with their property. But isn't that what zoning and planning's for? For people who want to put up shopping centers, they can come over here. People want to put up single-family residence, they put over here. When you get a zoning and planning, it's supposed to be for some period of time so that the businesses and the residents can all sort themselves out. If it's just a simple matter of getting a hold of the property and then filling out an application and say, well, we're going to destroy the buildings anyway, so you might as well take what we're going to give you. At some point you might want to just say, no, this is a XYZ zoning and that's what it's going to stay. There was a reason why it was made that way. I presume city staff, and there was a lot of discussion in other zoning hearings I've been involved in. There's a lot of discussion about why things become what they are. And if it really doesn't mean anything that well-placed individuals can just change everything, then why are you folks even here? Why is the historic preservation really there if it's a done deal? The fix is in. That's all I have. Just something for you to think about is that you're supposed to represent the citizens and make recommendations to the city council, but you also are the planning and zoning board. And if the project doesn't fit into the planning and the zoning, it's not, oh, well, we'll just change it. You say, no, we're not going to do it. You bought the property. You knew what it was. I buy a piece of property out of a runway, and then all of a sudden I'm screaming that there's airplanes flying over top of me. Well, I bought the property. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tucker. All right, seeing that there's no more blue cards, we'll go ahead and close the public comment section and just deliberate or ask questions of staff or the applicant.
I have a question for staff. On one of the zone categories they're talking about, that they would be allowed, they could go up higher or something like that. But they would have to do obviously some other things to get to that kind of height. So what is restricting them at this point with this request from going higher than a 2-story, some of the areas they're mentioning, 3-story, 4-story? Is there any restriction?
Well, right now, what's being stipulated is that specific transect plan that was shown. one of the conditions of approval, well, it's not, well, that is one of the conditions of approval. That transect plan shows an area where they're limiting their height.
Okay, so it
So
would
that's
include-
limited to 3 stories. With the
Okay.
T5 MSF, they would have the ability to pick a building form or type that would allow up to 4 stories. They're self-limiting in that area and agreeing to a 3-story height. So
Okay.
that's one thing that's what's in place to limit that height within that area. It's on the crosshatch on that
Okay.
exhibit.
And I have a question, and it's probably more for the developer. Have you considered, and I'm sure you looked at all your options, but have you considered, and maybe the contributing properties are not in a place that you could, like Ms. Chenoweth, like, I remember when that house was relocated from over there on First Street over to Pasadena, right? So you're on Wilbur, well, but it's on Pasadena Street, right? Have you guys considered relocating some of these homes to a lot of the vacant lots that are surrounding the area that, I know there's some vacant lots within that district, so that those contributing properties can continue to contribute to the neighborhood?
We have, we've tried to advertise to the public that we are willing to give away each of these homes to anyone that would be willing to relocate them. We have also offered to put them in touch with contractors that can assist with the relocation and pay up to $10,000 per home of that relocation cost. We have looked at it ourselves of relocating some of those structures. It's extremely expensive. It's cost prohibitive. It's as much as $80,000 and above per home, and they're quite small, and the materials that were used at that time make it even more difficult to relocate.
Okay, thank you.
I hadn't even thought of that. That's a good question. Any other comments?
We talked a little earlier about the, having this go before design review, or having that be a stipulation. And then as we were talking, kind of coming up the stairs, just in general about the form-based code, what it sounded like to me, there's not a good, we're learning what form-based code is right now and how to utilize it and everything like that. It doesn't sound like there's a good checks and balance system in form-based code in what does this end up looking like in the neighborhood? What's the overall look? If form-based, it almost sounded like if something's going to form-based code and they can kind of put anything in, then maybe that should almost always trigger a design review discussion about what the look of the project is coming in. Do I understand that right about the form-based code, that once they've got it, then kind of anything can go there without anything other than staff review?
Vice Chair and Board Member Boyle, the code has very specific requirements with regard to the building forms, different types, Main Street, mid-rise buildings, courtyard buildings, so forth. And with each one of those building types, there are very specific standards in terms of the placement to the street and where doors can be and the type of frontage that you have on there with the shop fronts or the arcades or whatever. There's also very specific provisions with regard to civic space and the streets types with the sidewalks and the trees and so forth. So a lot of the building form is very specific that they will have to follow. The actual architecture, the skin on the building and what it looks like, whether it's a modern or whatever, is not in the code. So that is open to the individual design, but it is very closely reviewed as part of giving that zoning clearance by staff and as part of that zoning clearance approval process, and looking at that architecture, and is it reinforcing the form, is it fitting the context of the area, and so forth.
With other, like what typically triggers a design review a requirement to go to before design review for other types of projects?
Otherwise, within the ordinance, it is if you are on an arterial street, which in this case, Mesa Drive, Main Street are arterial streets, or if you're larger than 20,000 square feet. So these buildings, otherwise, if they weren't in the form-based code, would be going to the design review board.
So would there be a logic to adapting the form-based code to require those same things that other buildings go through, or is there a reason why we're not doing it that way?
Again, Vice Chair and Board Member Boyle, when we set up the form-based code, one of the attractions to it was that we could reduce some of the other steps in the process to help encourage use of this code versus other zoning options because of the controls that are in the form-based code. That's something we want to encourage the use. So it was a specific decision to not require the design review board as a part of the process.
And for a requirement to be amended, is that something that council would have to decide?
To amend the code to require it?
So, yeah, for form-based code to require a
Yes,
design
that-
review with
that would
the same arterial and the same square footage?
Yes, that would have to be a
that would have
text
to go
amendment.
before
Yes.
council.
Yes.
And is that something we can recommend here, or does that go through a different process as well?
Ultimately, any amendments to the zoning code do have to come through this board for recommendation before they could go to the council.
And would we do it as part of a case, or would this be a separate thing that we would?
That would need to be a separate thing.
That we would
have to
take
put that
up
as some type of item on the board
And
agenda
would
for
we
discussion.
would bring this to you and say, hey, we want this to go forward, and then you guys would kind of figure out the language for it and then bring it to us for a vote?
Essentially, yes. We have a large stack of zoning text amendments that are on our list to work on. It's a matter of prioritizing something within that large list to work on.
Okay.
Chair, Board, if I may, Jeff McVeigh with the City Manager's Office. I worked on the form-based code and a project manager for developing the form-based code. And I guess I want to add a little nuance to the answer of why design review was or was not included. The incentive part is true. It was truly we went through 2 years of planning, the Central Maine Plan, which established our goals, our vision, policy direction for what should happen in the downtown area. The form-based code was developed in parallel at the same time as the Central Maine Plan to be the implementing document of that plan. So we went through such an extensive planning process and such a public process in developing the form-based code that the reason we don't have public hearings is because we went through such a process. That people should be able to look at either of those documents and have a very good understanding of what can happen next to their property. Form-based codes are extremely prescriptive. A lot of people like to say that they're flexible. They're not. They're extremely prescriptive. But that prescriptive nature also lets everybody next to them know what could happen. So if you live next to a vacant piece of dirt, you can look at that code and say, all right, I'm not going to get an industrial use next to me. So to that extent, we are trying to incentivize people to use a form-based code, but we're also trying to allow that creativity in the architecture, to allow staff to really be able to use their good judgment in working through the architecture problems. Today, in a normal zoning case, staff has less, I guess, authority to influence design than they do in the form-based code. Because it is strictly staff level approval and less stipulated otherwise, it does give staff more authority to actually push design than they do under our current zoning. There was another thought I had that I'm losing right now, but I guess it creates the incentive, yes, but it does also give us the ability to push design further than we could push otherwise. It was intended that design review board was the option of last resort. If staff and applicants couldn't get to the point where they could work and agree on the architecture, then you go to the design review board as kind of the arbiter of what is the right answer. We're not at that point with this applicant. This applicant's working with us very closely. We meet weekly on this project. I don't have concerns that we're not going to be able to find a solution in architecture that would require the design review board to be kind of our staff's hammer when they couldn't get what they expected in the first place. So just my 2 cents to that. I'm sorry that.
And the design review board probably reviewed the form-based code as it was coming through the process, and I think if they would have felt strongly about needing to review this, they might have chimed in, or maybe some of them did, but ultimately they decided that this was fine as it is. Is that correct?
It was 2012, so you're testing my memory a little bit. But yes, we went to all the boards with the form-based code. We presented to everybody. After it was adopted, we came back and did kind of a roadshow to try and give everybody an understanding of how the form-based code works. But yes, it was very clear when we were going through the adoption process. This does not require this unless is so stipulated by the planning director that we have to go to design review. So
All right, well, and I guess I still go back to the issue we brought up with the Main Street apartments that we talked about sooner. You come through Phoenix and Tempe and you see all the new buildings that have come up and they feel like the 2020s, and then you hit Mesa and suddenly it kind of drops to 1953 or the 1980s. One of the problems that I run into with people of my generation is they move away because they think Mesa is a retirement area. Mesa is for old people. The challenge with this building is, to me, it looks a lot like a retirement community, or at least I'd say it would, except that retirement communities now look like this, which is a completely different, 2020s thing. So it doesn't even look like that. It just looks like an old 1963 building. When the architects of the temple, 99 years ago, when they started designing it, they were doing cutting edge, one of the most remarkable buildings west of the Mississippi. And now here we are 100 years later, and we're doing something that could have been designed in 1930 or 1940, just hundreds of years ago. I don't feel like that talks about future Mesa. I don't think that talks about the light rail and the new things that are coming in. And so I would like there to be a way of saying, no, this needs to look like 2020. This needs to reflect that. And whatever way we do that, whether it be through the design review board or some other method, I feel like something should be done. And if this board doesn't have the power to do it, then the design review board should do it or someone else should do it.
And I guess along those same lines, I feel the same way. I like the idea of the flex use. I like the idea of the redevelopment of that area, but this is a prominent corner in our city. It's an entry and exit area into our downtown area. I just think we have a great opportunity here. So I guess I'm leaning towards that too. I asked the question downstairs if we could refer this to our design review board, just to get a little more. I can appreciate what you guys went through, but I feel like it's just, we can do a little more to it, is kind of what I'm thinking. And I think with that board's input and direction, they're the professionals. I'm not a professional architect. Obviously, we have Mr. Boyle is a professional architect, but I just feel like we need a little more to it than what we have there now. I do, however, I have a little bit of concern about the historic district. I understand that you've tried everything you can to get these homes moved. It's kind of a catch-22 that you're in. So I appreciate you making it compatible, doing the down, tiered down towards the historic homes that are existing. But I feel like as far as the skin of the building, maybe we can do a little more.
So getting back to the zoning, I am okay with what they're attempting to do here and what the vision is, especially since they put the restriction out. I see that on there, the height. I do have, heartburn over the historic stuff. However, when I first started hearing about this case in the media and stuff like that, I was like really worried that they were just taking an entire chunk, like huge amounts. I'm happy to see that the majority of the site is not in that district. But it is a weird kind of outline or thing there. And if those homeowners sold and, just elected to do that and not live there anymore, then that's kind of their thing. So, I wish they could move them or do something with them. But because it is that weird kind of up and down thing. I'm okay with what their objective is, what they're trying to do. Because it's form-based, I agree, I don't think we really need to go through and add a design guidelines thing. It's more of a staff directive of what we're thinking. I have no problem with a 1950s style building or something like that, if it is in match in honoring kind of the heritage or the area around it, or in keeping with the temple. I do have a little mixed feelings about some of the elevations, which have nothing to do with this case, but just for staff's reference, it feels like you have one side on the right, east side of Udall and then the west side of Udall. It kind of has like it feels like there's a differentiation between the two designs when you're looking at it from the north side. I don't know, or maybe, I don't know. But just when they're discussing things and going through the process, that's kind of my thoughts. And I understand that they're trying to make it look in keeping with, the mixed use on the corner next to the temple to look at like their visitor center thing. But I think as far as what they're trying to do, the change in the zones, the plat, I think they're doing pretty good with that. And then I like the two-story in that, what is it, usually like a paseo or something like there. It looks pretty, yeah. I think that's a good transition. I wish you could keep the trees, but it's hard to save 100-year-old trees, so good luck with that.
Also hard to save 100-year-old buildings, right?
Yes, they tend to fall out. You can save the bricks.
I won't repeat what's already been said, other than just, I like a lot of the aspects of the project. I am worried about historic preservation. It seems like that's a different issue that we're going to be tackling. Hopefully, we'll be looking at things like demolition, but that's not our purview to talk about. I'm not in favor of having this go to the design review board because I believe that the form-based code as it is now and our staff expertise will handle design issues. I mean, unless the applicant, I believe you said you wouldn't mind that stipulation. So if that was added, would you be comfortable with that?
What I said was, we'd like an opportunity to present our architecture. And sorry, this isn't a question that you asked, but I do think it's important to keep in mind we're balancing a number of issues with this project from every regard. We talk about historic preservation, and we own a number of homes in the historic district that we preserve and will continue to preserve. The truth is, we're less than 300 feet in some regards to transit, and we have 1,000-foot homes on 8,000-foot lots. From a policy standpoint, it's just not what you want within a pitching wedge of transit. And so it is hard to knock down these homes in a historic district and yet trying to balance transit-oriented development and the policy steps that have been taken already by City Council to promote this type of development. So that's a balance. I've had people approach me and say, we don't want to lose a single home. And I have had people approach me and say, please knock those down and build new housing there. We think it will lift the neighborhood more. From an architecture standpoint, we're in the same spot. I have heard people say, this should be more modern. And I've heard numerous people say, no, this needs to respect the historic district more in its architectural form. I think you're dealing with a policy issue. I think to the extent that there's a policy recommendation on a project going through the design review board is something that could be taken up with City Council. I think maybe a positive step in the right direction would be you can always deny the project. You could approve it, and you could approve it too with guidance to staff on what you would like to see in their review. And I think that would probably get us to the same place.
Right. I agree with that. What do you think about asking staff to maybe do some specific things with design review when they're looking at these buildings as part of their zoning clearance process?
I think this has a ways to go before it reflects the way the city wants to look right now and the future Mesa and design in 2020. I don't feel like, if it's gotten this far through staff, I don't feel like it's going to make the changes it needs to really fit in with the new city that we're trying to design around our transit hub.
And I would be comfortable approving the zoning case with the stipulation that it go through the design review board.
Madam Chair and board members, if I may interject again for just a moment. I guess coming back to the central question, is the board comfortable with the rezoning from, it's primarily the T4 neighborhood flex, the T5 Main Street flex for the property with the restriction on that south 85 feet for the 3-story? The secondary kind of question that's, while the board certainly can add conditions, such as going through the design review board process on here, I can understand why there may be some interest and concern to do that, because it is a sensitive area, as has been pointed out by several board members, next to downtown, next to the temple, where we're going in this important corner. It may be warranted. But kind of getting beyond that a little bit, it becomes a little bit of a challenge of what's in this board's purview to react to and direct, because while they've shown you concepts of where they think they're going with the project, they're not required to, and didn't even have to bring those at all to this meeting. It is a very challenging site because of the historic district, and we have been working through that process, and how do we transition from a light rail stop or prominent corner to a low-density historic district. And it is going to be a challenge. The Design Review Board could help with that process some. But I think also through the zoning clearance process and the input we've been receiving from this board and others, that staff can work well with the applicant to come up with an appropriate design.
I think on the zoning, I love the massing, I love the things they're doing. It's almost humorous that they have to dig an underground parking. I mean, Mesa is like all parking lots, and here you guys are like digging underneath to do it. I mean, that's a kind of a new thing. It's really good. The massing and everything like that, even the height and everything, I think I'm fine with. I mean, with the other stuff coming along Main Street, when people talk to me about it, I say go higher. Let's make this look like a new thing. But again, I lived in New York for 10 years, and in New York, they don't care if there's a 2-story building and an 80-story building next to it, right? They just let the city grow and become vibrant and be exciting like that. And so I understand there's some historical things there, but why is there even a step down? I don't see a reason why you have to step down. You can have, houses can be next to tall buildings and nobody gets hurt from it or no one's damaged from it. So some of those things with that. And then the same with the old houses. Those old houses have terrible insulation values. They have plumbing problems. A friend of mine rented one of those houses at one point. You had to sit sideways on the toilet because it was so squished in the bathroom. There's just some fundamental challenges with some of the houses right along there. So preserving those, I mean, yes, we want to save our stuff, but there was even an article the other day, the Serine House just sits there that has no purpose right now. We're almost kind of hoarding some of our older stuff, and it doesn't really, it's great to keep this old stuff, but you don't, not just to keep it, right? You don't just have old stuff just to have old stuff around. That doesn't help anybody. So as far as the zoning and everything else, I think is great. I wish we could interject some energy into the overall design, and that's the way I feel with adding the stipulation for design review, which sounds like the only thing that we have actual power to put.
All right, well,
We ready for a
with
motion?
that, sure, if someone would like to make a motion.
I think it's on the right page. I would recommend that we approve ZON 18-00375, District 4, along with the companion case of the Mesa Temple Redevelopment District 4, with the caveat that we add the stipulation that these buildings or this project, I guess the project in entirety, would go through design review. You're getting ready to tell me?
The design review process?
Yes, through the design review board.
Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor? Or please vote. I shouldn't say all in favor. Just go ahead and vote.
Oh, that's right. Both vote.
Aye.
1, 2, 3.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, so then that motion passes. Thank you. Okay. Mr. Wesley, is there anything else that you want to talk about on our agenda today? No other business? Okay. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I would motion that we adjourn.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Oh, now we can
Motion
vote.
passed. Yes, thank you very much.
Now we can vote on there, the last thing.
Yeah, oh, here, we can go ahead and vote on there. There you go.